Hi everyone, welcome back to How to Kitchen. In the last episode, we taught you some basic cooking techniques for the kitchen beginner. In today's episode, we're gonna level things up a little bit. We're gonna teach you some intermediate techniques that you can use to put together a steak meal family style. So to prepare a steak meal with sides, we're gonna think of some flavors. One of my favorite things to pair with steak is caramelized onions. We're gonna use red onions today. We're gonna slice them up thin, and then we're gonna caramelize them in the pan until they get nice and sweet and really brown and soft. I use red onions because I think they taste a little bit sweeter than yellow or white onions. We're trying to caramelize these onions. We're trying to bring them down low and slow, develop all that flavor. I'm not gonna be adding anything until the last bit. I don't add any sugar inside. All that sweetness comes directly from the onions. All right, we're gonna go on medium heat here. Now, it might look like my pan is very full at this point, but you will see that as we caramelize these onions, they reduce in size. All that water content gets removed as vapor, and then you're gonna be left with a much reduced, sticky, sweet, almost like an onion jam. Remember, again, if you're using a good quality non-stick pan, you want something that doesn't scratch your pan, so I recommend either a wooden spoon or a silicone spatula. Now the key here is that we're gonna go low and slow. This is gonna take the better part of about 30 to maybe 45 minutes, right? Depending on how much onion you have in your pan. Once your onions have sweated a little bit and they've gotten slightly softer, you're gonna reduce the heat to a medium-low, and you're gonna keep these moving in the pan a couple of minutes at a time, making sure that they don't stick, they don't burn. Remember, you're going for caramelization, which means browning, softening, but no crisping, yeah? Now the onions have started to sweat a bit. You can see they're a little bit more translucent, they're a little bit softer. This is when I reduce my heat, and now I'm gonna cook them in this state for at least half an hour, stirring them occasionally. So the next condiment that I have together with my steak, this is a side that I'm pairing with it, is roasted garlic. Again, really flavorful, a real favorite of everyone. A soft cloves of garlic that are a little bit sweet, a little bit savory, and very flavorful. So with these whole cloves of garlic, you're gonna bake them in a piece of aluminum foil. The first thing you do is cut the garlic cloves, creating these nice cross sections. You get your garlic cloves together. And don't worry if some of them break up because you've got the bottoms that are a bit more sturdy, okay? Got a little bit of salt, as well as a bit of cooking oil. Don't use anything too fancy here. And then next, I'm gonna wrap these into a parcel. I'm rolling the foil as I go, so I create a tightly sealed sort of section in there. Now I've got some open ends, right? What do? I'm going to fold up the sides and seal that up. So now that you've got your little parcel, you're gonna put this into the oven at 160 degrees for approximately 45 minutes. So it's been about 10 or 12 minutes now that we've cooked our onions. I want to show you what they look like so that you have these visual cues, you understand what's happening. They've softened substantially now. You can see some of the edges here are a little bit wispy. That's because they've lost some of their moisture and they're starting to collapse and turn sweet. They're really quite transparent and translucent now. I want all of these pieces, including the larger bits, I want all of them to get nice and soft, nice and squishy, and nice and sweet. At this point, I'm going to salt it to release even more moisture. Right, the next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna caramelize some carrots. You can use sugar, you can use honey here. Today I'm gonna use gula melaka because I really like the kind of earthy flavors it gives. We're gonna cut these carrots up into what they call the farmer's cut that's a little bit odd shaped, but gives it a nice look and gives you some nice surface area also. With your carrot, you will cut down and then you will turn the carrot to face the other way. So every piece of carrot looks kind of interesting. There are angles and sharp edges everywhere, and this picks up very nicely because the carrot is always sitting on a flat side. Great for browning or caramelizing and glazing, which is what we're gonna do next. So we're first gonna boil some water in a pan. As soon as the water comes to a boil, the carrots go in. The carrots will cook inside the boiling water. After that, we're gonna glaze them by adding more things into the pan. Now, a quick word on what I'm doing here. As the onions have started to caramelize and take on a slightly browner color, you notice that as I flip and stir them, I'm also making sure that new surfaces are being put into contact with the pan. I'm not sort of just moving it around willy-nilly. Now, if a certain portion looks a little bit blonde and it hasn't taken off enough color, I'm sort of gonna guess that that's not as cooked as other parts that are a bit darker, so I'm just gonna move that around. Also, some tips. Don't do things like bunch everything up in half a pan. That wastes the pan's surface. And what you have now is a thick bunch of stuff, and there's not enough in the surface of the pan. What you wanna do is you wanna let the pan work for you by spreading the food across the entire surface and then moving it around periodically. All right, the water in the pan has almost evaporated now, so I'm just gonna make sure that this carrot is cooked. But it is. It's cooked, but it's got a little bit of bite, which is perfect for glazed carrots. It's time to add in two things: butter and your sugar. In this case, I'm using Gula Melaka today. I don't wanna burn my carrots, so I get my butter into the pan. Now I'm gonna salt this quite generously. I love that smell. Brown butter and carrot. Now you can see now that parts of the carrot are starting to color and brown, which is great. Soon I'm gonna be adding a good tablespoonful of Gula Melaka to this pan. So just a word on this Gula Melaka. They come in large blocks. I have chopped this up, little bits in here, but great for adding texture and adding nice flavor to vegetables like carrot. Tablespoonful. You know what, screw it, I'm just gonna add one more. Yum. Sugar's in the pan, your pan is hot, so you wanna be careful that this doesn't start to burn. So now at this point, I'm gonna make sure that everything keeps moving. And as my Gula Melaka reduces together with the brown butter and gets thicker, you're gonna start to see it coat the carrots thickly. Can you see that sort of nice, shiny, glazed texture that's occurring right now? Now you can bring that even further by heating the pan a little bit more and reducing the Gula Melaka into a thicker syrup so that it binds with the butter and coats every piece of carrot nicely. Very nice, needs a little bit of salt, crack of black pepper. Okay, take a look at this now in the pan. As that Gula Melaka has turned into a syrup and has reduced, and the pan has continued to caramelize the surface of each piece of carrot, you're getting these nice, lovely brown bits. Bear in mind that smell is also from the browning butter. At this point, I know my carrots are pretty much done already. And there's one final thing I'm gonna do just before I put them into a bowl. This is dried dill, and I really like dried dill together with my glazed carrots. So I'm gonna get a nice pinch of that in there. Give that a bit of a toss in the pan. And my glazed carrots are done. My onions are about 2/3 of the way there already. You can see that what used to be a pan full of onions has now reduced into a pan not so full of onions. So you can see that the color is getting quite obviously brown, and there's some bits that are more caramelized than others. Now I want to make sure this is quite even across the batch of onions I have in my pan, and this is gonna take maybe another 15 minutes on low heat. Now if you take a look at what's happening in the pan, the onions have sort of softened into one mass of onion bits. You don't see too many individual pieces popping out. A lot of this is just a squishy jam almost. And the color has turned quite dark brown. Now I'm gonna give this a sniff test. What do I smell? I smell notes of fried onion. It's got this nice rounded, sweet smell going, and it's quite strong, yet very, very pleasant at the same time. I don't get any bitterness. There's nothing that's burning in the pan. At this point, I got two options for you. The first is bring this further and really caramelize it down for another 10 minutes, and you're gonna get very nice, sweet, soft, tasty onions. And the second option, which is something I like to do to lift the entire meal, I like to add a couple of teaspoons of balsamic vinegar to the caramelized onions at this point. Now it's important to note, don't add the balsamic vinegar too early on. You want to develop the flavor naturally in the onions, and only when it's close to being complete do you add in a little bit of balsamic just to give it a hit of brightness, a little bit of clarity. So when you eat this together with the steak, it lifts the flavor, it brightens the palate a bit. And I'm just gonna slosh in 2 or 3 teaspoons. This is gonna darken the onions almost instantly, and it's gonna complement that syrupy texture, that roasted caramelized flavor that you brought out low and slow in those onions. Caramelized onions done. So it's been about 45 to 50 minutes. I think my garlic is done. I'm gonna pull it out of the oven and take a look, okay? Smells really good. Roasted garlic always fills up a room. I think all the crew can smell that. Right, I'm gonna open this up now. So it's gonna be a little bit hot. We're gonna take a look at what the interior of the packet looks like, what has happened to this garlic in the last 50 minutes. So if you look at each of these, you're gonna see how soft and squishy each clove of hot garlic. Eating a lot of roasted garlic is fine. You're still gonna have friends. You can still kiss your girlfriend or your boyfriend because roasted garlic doesn't actually have that much flavor that comes out on your breath, not like raw garlic, okay? So let's take a look at our steak. This is a ribeye steak, one of my favorite cuts of meat of all time. I don't know of any chef that dislikes ribeye. We may have favorite cuts elsewhere, but ribeye is probably one of the most common cuts that everyone uses, and it makes for a delicious steak. Why? Because ribeye has a great balance of tenderness, taste, and fat. And these three things work together to make a delicious piece of meat. So taking a look at the steak, you have a nice block of fat in the center. This will melt slightly and perfume the steak. And you've also got fatty bits around as well as a nice marbling throughout the meat. How do you know when a steak is done? Now, there are a couple of tips, and one of the most useful I have is using the fingertip to thumb method. This is not foolproof, but it does give you a little bit more information on what your steak should feel like. Now, if you just gently bring your index finger to your thumb and you touch this fleshy bit, my fleshy bit might be fleshier than other people's fleshy bits because I have fat fingers. But anyway, that's a rare steak. That's very underdone. That's very uncooked. And then you bring your middle finger to your thumb and you feel that, and that's a little bit tougher now, your muscle. So that could be a medium rare, slightly on the rare side still. And then you bring your fourth finger to your thumb and you feel that, and that's a medium well already. That's on its way to being well done. And then you bring your baby finger to your thumb and then you feel that, and that is a completely well done steak. So you can get a food thermometer, a digital instant read thermometer when you cook steak, but there are too many variables involved here. If you plunge the thermometer in too deep and you test the wrong part of the meat and the temperature is inaccurate. So what I suggest to most home cooks who are enthusiastic and want to cook more steak is basically cook more steak. Get a feel of what happens to the meat. Understand how long it takes to cook the meat to the point that you enjoy it, and how long it took to cook the meat to the point where you didn't enjoy it. Literally, the only way to understand how to cook meat better is to overcook and undercook meat. This way you give yourself a gauge and you understand at what point should you stop the cooking or rest it or take it off the heat. And a lot of this is just experience. So this is a steak that's cut to about 1 inch thick. This is the minimum thickness that I recommend for a steak. Any thinner than this, and you won't develop enough crust on the outside before the inside is overcooked. Now, I prefer to eat my meat about medium rare, and I know some people prefer it rare or medium well. But let's go with medium rare as our baseline first. When you cook a piece of meat, this meat is colder than the pan surface should be quite hot. The minute the meat goes into the pan, the temperature difference between the pan surface and the meat starts to cook the meat surface, and you get this nice browning layer if you cook this long enough. Now, if your meat is too thin, by the time the crust and the color develops, the interior of the meat has overcooked already. So you want to select a thick enough steak where you can develop crust without the center being overcooked. Second thing to note, always get yourself a nice pan to cook steak in. If there's one reason why a good pan is worth it, it's cooking good steak. You want a heavy bottom frying pan. It could be non-stick or it could be cast iron. So in summary, 2 key things here. Get a nice thick pan that can hold and retain heat, and make sure the piece of meat you're cooking is nice and thick as well. So now that we know what happens to a piece of meat when it goes into the frying pan, we need to understand what happens when you season a piece of meat. The minute I put salt into this, it's gonna start to draw and pull moisture up to the surface. Now, if I leave the salt there for too long, the salt penetrates the meat and it changes the structure of the meat. And then you get this very compact texture that doesn't really taste like a steak. Now, if I don't salt this enough or for sufficient time, what will happen is I can't develop a decent crust on the meat as I'm cooking this in the pan. I'm gonna liberally salt the outside of the steak. I'm gonna flip that. Now using my tongs, I'm gonna make sure that all the salt crystals are happily sitting in the surface. I'm just gonna rub that in slightly. This is a substantially thick piece of meat, so you wanna salt your edges as well. Now you're gonna ask, why don't I add pepper to the steak? Why don't I coat it in pepper? This is a personal preference, and some people find that adding pepper to a steak before you cook it adds a very bitter, dark flavor to the steak that they don't necessarily like. I, for one, prefer pepper on a steak after it's cooked. I'm not a big fan of having pepper on the steak and then cooking that in the butter and the oil. I prefer just salt. Now we're gonna let this steak sit for about 5 to 10 minutes. And after that, we're gonna cook this steak in our lovely cast iron frying pan. Okay, so we've salted the steak for about 10 minutes now, and you can see how the surface of the meat has turned a nice deep red color on both sides. I always have a couple of cloves of garlic. Skin on, that's no problem. We're gonna use this to perfume some of the butter as we baste the steak in its final stage. Right, I'm gonna start to sear my steak. This is one of my most enjoyable experiences in the kitchen. Just the sounds, the sights, the smells. There's a whole bunch of ASMR things going on here as well. So with the cast iron pan on induction, just take note, you want to give this at least 3 to 4 minutes of decent heating or medium-high heat so that the bottom of the pan comes to temperature evenly. This is where you have elevator music whilst the pan is heating. Ding, 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 ding. As my pan comes up to temperature, I put a little bit of oil in. A good 2, maybe 3 tablespoons of oil. Make sure it coats the bottom of the pan evenly. One way you can tell that the oil in the pan has heated to the correct temperature, it starts to smoke slightly. It also looks very, very liquid. Because the oil is hot, it's not viscous anymore. So it flows like water. You can see the rivulets coming out. Pan's hot enough, and listen to this, okay? It's a beautiful sound, one of the best sounds ever. Now there are 2 schools of thought here. The first school of thought says, flip your steak as few times as possible. Don't molest it. Let it brown and then flip it once more, let it brown and then take it off the heat. The second school of thought, which I belong to, is move your steak around multiple times. Now what does this do? When you start to flip your steak, the bottom section comes up to the top and it isn't heated. So at this point, you're letting that sort of section, that half of the steak rest. And I find this is a better method to keep the cooking of the steak and the interior quite even. This crackling, popping, this snapping is the sound of the water inside the surface of the meat turning into steam almost instantly when it's in contact with the pan. Now, if your pan is very thin, it cannot retain enough heat. It doesn't turn that moisture into steam, and it can't brown the meat. So if your surface is wet and the pan surface is not hot enough, it will simply not brown. This is why if you cook steak in a very, very thin pan, you will never get a brown crust, but instead what you will get is this steamed gray surface. Now this has been on one side for about 1.5 minutes. I'm gonna flip this just to show you what kind of color has been developing. Now taking a look at this, you can see a nice even browning has occurred. Some of the fat has turned a little bit golden brown, and the meat, you can see, has taken on this very nice hue. So this is great, this is excellent, this is exactly what I want. Now I can enhance this color further later when I start to baste the steak with a little bit of butter. And at this point, I'm using my tongs to give me a feel of the meat. What's inside? This is completely rare. So I'm gonna compare this gently with, say, this is first finger doneness. So I'm gonna keep flipping it every 45 seconds or so. So once I think I'm quite close to medium rare, I'm gonna reduce the heat, and now I'm gonna give this a couple of pats of butter in there. Those cloves of garlic, I'm just gonna crush them gently, and then into the pan they go. Now what am I doing here? This is called basting. I tilt the butter down, and as the butter foams, I'm sort of pouring this all over the steak. Now as I'm feeling this, I'm getting close to medium rare. So I don't want to have this in the pan for very much longer. Just want to make sure I get a little bit of that final basting going. All right, I'm quite happy with that. Steak's gonna come out. And I'm just gonna have this steak rest here for a couple of minutes. What's next? I've got some vegetables to cook. So this is my last condiment. This is just a sauteed vegetable. This is a mix of different types of kales. And I'm just gonna cook this down very quickly with a little bit of butter. In goes my veg. Gonna give it a hit of salt, as well as some pepper. Now with vegetables like kale, you don't want to cook this for too long. You want to give it a bit of a shock, but you don't want them to get too soft. So one good way to really get this cooking very, very quick, as it's cooking in the pan, I've got a little bit of water. I'm just going to pour this into the pan like that. As it becomes steam, I put a lid over, and this should accelerate the cooking very, very quickly. All right, lid off. Vegetables look good to go. Take this off the heat. And to finish, give this a squeeze of lemon. Give that a stir, and my veg component, nice and light and bright, with a little bit of lemon juice, is complete. So we're ready to plate up now. I'm gonna cut up my steak, and I'm gonna have all the rest of the components placed together on a plate. Some of that dried dill as a garnish on top of the carrots. And voila, that looks really good. So this to me is a complete meal. We've got a little bit of the carbohydrate from the carrot. We've got some really tasty onions, and we've got some vegetables in the form of our kale. And the piece de resistance is of course this lovely piece of ribeye, and one of my favorite condiments to go with it, roasted garlic. Now the great thing about putting together a steak meal, especially one that's family style, is that you have all your condiments around the piece of meat. So how you choose your condiments to pair together with a steak is really up to you, but you always want to balance a couple of things. You have a piece of meat here that's quite savory and well salted. It's also a little bit fatty. We've got a little bit of acidity in the onions and lemon in the vegetables. This is to cut through a bit of that richness and that fattiness from a well-marbled piece of steak. And you've also got the sweetness in the roasted carrots together with the gula melaka. And the onions, once they're caramelized, are very sweet as well. That pairs really well with the sort of savory essence of the ribeye. That's all we have for you this episode, everyone. We taught you how to sear a steak today and some slightly more complex techniques of how to pair things together with a steak. Next episode, we're gonna go even more advanced to teach you how to make some things from scratch. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe, and if you want to get a notification from us whenever we post a new video, click on that bell. Alternatively, you can download the Click Network app and you can watch our videos there. We'll see you for the next episode of How to Kitchen.